All right, so I want to say hello to everybody. Welcome to the hot seat today, and this is early December of 2021. And so my name is Pastor Jason. I am the directing pastor here at Crossroads, and we have...
I'm Tim Lee, the Contemporary Worship Arts Director.
And...
Leslie Anderson, Director of Connections.
And this is...
Brian GAREAU.
Yay!
Yeah.
So when we first decided to have the podcast and interview people about their story, Brian was one of the first people that we talked about. We want to get him on here. And then we talked to you early and you said, well, you're writing this book and you need to focus on that. And then once it's out, it would be a good opportunity to then talk to us about it. So Brian is a friend of mine since we arrived. We arrived 6.5 years ago. He's been a longtime Christian, longtime leader in the greater Peoria area, a longtime Christian, and he is married to our dear friend Pat GAREAU, who was on staff here, passed away, like, what was it,
March of last year.
Yep. I was trying to think how many months that was, yeah. I
can tell you days, but that's okay.
It's still very hard. It's still like just so surreal. I just still can't wrap my head around her being gone.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would make two of us.
Oh my gosh. She was just such a big part of our staff family. She did visitation here. She was on our care team. She was a licensed pastor. And so we're going to get to your story. I just want to hear about you and your life and your faith. But there's a book that I want everyone to know has just been finished and is available. And I'm going to hold it up right here so people can see it. This is Brian's book called Keeping a Firm Grip, A Perspective During Challenging Times. And this is Pat's story. So tell us about this book.
Well, if you remember, we had a wonderful celebration here about 2 weeks before COVID restrictions went full steam.
Yep.
Just before. And so sitting at home, needed to find some way to start the healing process. And so I started going through some of Pat's things and found some wonderful, wonderful notes, some text messages, some journal entries. And so ultimately, she helped me write the book. So I basically wrote it for three reasons. One was her legacy. She didn't write her story in a book, but she wrote it in life. So I tried to capture that. The second thing was all the traditional healing that takes place wasn't available because we were all restricted. Yep. And then the third was, as we started the journey with Pat's specific cancer, which is pancreatic cancer, became, I would say probably the best term is very frustrated because of general lack of awareness, the fact that there is no testing that can be done before it's in late stages, very limited treatments, very limited funding. And yet it has the second highest mortality rate. 5-year mortality rate is 10%. And the second thing is that they're anticipating over the next several years it will be number 2 for cancer deaths after lung.
Wow.
Yeah.
So those were just amazing to discover. When you think about, you think about this area and you think about some of the amazing things that happen for like breast cancer. You think of the great stuff that's done for St. Jude's and children's cancer.
Yep.
So pancreatic cancer needs to increase its awareness, also get its funding. And so one of the things is that 70% of all the proceeds from the book will go to the Pancreatic Society for research and awareness.
Yeah. I remember driving in Peoria, talking to her right after the discovery. I remember where I was. I remember driving and her explaining. It was very far along by the time that she discovered it.
Yeah, that's it's actually called the silent killer because it's too often diagnosed as either acid reflux and or all the signs of gallbladder issues. So the bottom line is that it goes a long time, and usually it's caught in stage 3 or stage 4.
which is way too late. But unlike some of the other cancers that we're aware of, you can't go take a blood test and see if you have it. So that's one of the things that they're working on right now are some tests to catch it really early on. They've got a ways to go, but they're making some progress.
So if someone were to pick up this book and say, oh, that's interesting, I want to read it, where would the story start? Kind of explain what they would discover as the start and where this story ends.
Well, it starts with a very simple statement, which is, that's not the way we planned it, which pretty much spells out life for us. This wasn't what we had planned. And then when we started reflecting on it, everybody, especially during the COVID, was going through so much loss, whether it was loss of freedom or health or jobs, etc. And so many of the messages in there, while the story is about cancer and Pat's struggle with that and journey, a lot of it is about perspective. It's about priorities. It's about choices. And we all have to make those in life. And because I love to share, teach, etc., there's about 50 questions in the back of the book. So individually you can do it, or it's also set up so you can do it in small groups.
And so, yeah, one of the things that I was noticing and I thought was very helpful was you seem to have a pretty good grasp of Scripture that helped frame your perspective. I guess, was that a big part of your marriage the whole time you and Pat were together?
Oh, she was much better at it than I was. No, it's amazing when you have resources at your fingertips that you can find exactly the verse that you're looking for. So
Yeah.
no, she was definitely much better at Scripture than I am.
Well, so as I read this book, because you let me read an early draft, it was, for me, it was fairly emotional because I was reliving it. Because she had been a staff member and a dear friend. And so I remember all these things as they happened. And so it was really emotional to me. And I realized, too, that because I was so close to her and you and everything going on, that most people would read it differently than I did because they wouldn't have had the same vantage point from the pastor, staff, friend perspective. So when you wrote the book and as you released it, who are the different audiences that you envision would pick this up and God might want to touch the most through it? What are the different types of people that you envision reading this?
I think anybody who either has gone through or is about to go through or is anticipating a loss. I mean, when you think about it, we lose jobs, we lose relationships, we lose our health, there's divorce, unfortunately there's miscarriages, there's loss of health, death. I prefer to think of it as rebirth rather than death. But so I think anybody, I'm sure it will probably get pigeonholed with cancer, and I'm really excited that it'll get pigeonholed in Christian.
Yeah.
But I would say those two areas. I think.
Well, and that's pretty much everybody. Because there's nobody that goes through life without loss.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly. Although one of the discussions I had with the editor was the cover. And they said, well, if you put that picture on the cover, some people won't pick it up. I said, well, that's their choice. Yeah. They said that cover has a very strong meaning in the book. And that's actually a watercolor of an actual picture I took of Pat holding her cross in hospice. So I agree with you, Tim. It's everybody, but we all haven't made that conclusion yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so something about this book and about your journey is, incredibly, and that's one thing I saw even more vividly displayed in the last couple months, incredibly deep-rooted faith that you have, but Pat had incredibly deep-rooted. And so one of the things about this story is if you were reading it for the first time, you might think, oh, there's going to be a miraculous recovery.
A
at the
happy
end.
ending.
Yeah. But no, in the end, it's she goes to be with the Lord, right?
Which is a happy ending.
Right. But one of the things that's communicated in the book is there is a depth of faith that can make even that ending a happy ending, which a lot of people, even who are Christian, they're not there yet, where they can walk through with that deeper roots, and in their grief, they can see the miracles. Because I even heard you say, as we were praying for a miracle. I mean, many times we laid hands on her and prayed for a miracle of healing, but you said, I heard your family say, we've seen many miracles as we've been praying.
Absolutely. We call them God winks.
Yeah.
We call them God winks.
So after she was diagnosed, you had about, was it a year? A little over a year?
The whole journey from initial until her going to heaven was 17 months.
17 months.
Which is not a long time, but it's 4 times the average life expectancy when you're at stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
So what were some of the miracles, or I guess incredible gifts of God that you received during that year that you've named to me on different occasions?
Well, I think the first one was certain individuals. There's a position that we were not aware of called the nurse navigator. OSF has those, and we had an amazing one. Amanda was she knew the ins and outs. She knew all the technical. She was bound and determined she was going to get the schedule to fit. Even when doctors said no, she figured out how to do it. And she had tremendous compassion. So, there were those people, and I mentioned 6 doctors throughout the 3 different hospitals that we were at, just some amazing. But I think probably the 2 that jump out the most was we did a new experimental, well, it's not experimental, it's FDA approved, but it's called a nanoknife surgery, which OSF is just starting to have now up in Chicago. And because of where the tumor is on the pancreas, it's right by all the major blood vessels. So cutting it, not good. Most surgeons don't want to even touch it. So this nanoknife surgery, they actually put 4 electrodes, and they actually pass an electric current and, quote, put the cells into a dormant state. They don't remove it. It goes into a dormant state. Well, we would have never known about that unless a Facebook posting that Pat put her initial diagnosis, and one of the individuals from a church that she served years earlier said, I think you need to contact such and such. And so we did. And lo and behold, one of the experts and early pioneers was in Chicago. So that was definitely a God wink. He did a wonderful job. And then I think probably another one was when we came back from Chicago to hospice. Pat was having lots of complications. And I remember vividly the director saying, after she examined Pat, it's a matter of days, not week. And so Pat and God decided 41 days was the right number. So, and it was a living visitation. We not to count things, just to count things, but we were just amazed. So we started just doing a little tally of all the different people that showed up. And it was a life visitation. She saw over 150 people. Well, she was in hospice. They literally put a note on the door and said, do not come in unless you go to the nurse's station, because there was so much traffic. But
yeah, I had to wait in the hall because there was like a line of people. People just kept coming to see her. It was awesome.
And the conversations were two-way. I mean, they were coming to express their love, but it was mutual for sure.
Yeah.
It was mutual for sure. And then just the timing of when she went to heaven.
Yeah.
If we would have waited a couple extra days, the 350 people that celebrated wouldn't have happened.
That's something I've thought about so many times. Even if it had been a month later, we couldn't have spent that time with her in the hospice home.
Nor could we have had the celebration.
Yeah, and that was one of the. I felt like the Holy Spirit moving in that service like I've never felt in a celebration of life before. Not that they all aren't awesome in their own unique way to remember and celebrate people, but I mean I could feel in my body the Holy Spirit. That day it was just powerful.
Well, and Tim, I mean, Tim's amazing, and the musicians are, but I just gave him a list of songs, and he was like, okay, we got it, no problem. And I know they did a lot of extra TLC. In fact, your bride sang the song that we sang at our wedding also, in this very room.
In this very room, yeah. So this book, what is the best way a person can get this book?
The easiest way is to go to Amazon.
Okay.
Just put Keeping a Firm Grip in my name, and it'll pull up with all my other books. But you can get that if you want to just do it electronically. You can also get it electronically.
Okay. And all that's through Amazon?
All through Amazon.
Are all of your other books on Amazon too? Can they get linked to any of your books through Amazon? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to talk about...
with one exception.
Yeah.
There is another Brian GAREAU. He's a professor. Some of the books that he's written, there's no way I could write those. He's very smart. The titles are scary. So.
I Googled my name today, and I found that it said something like Jason Wolver's net worth. I'm like, well, let's see what that is. I'm like, I guess there's some professional musician somewhere named Jason Wolver, and he has a much higher net worth than me. So anyway, I thought, people are going to see that and think I'm secretly rich. Anyway, if you see that, that's not me. But yeah, so there is another Brian GAREAU, and I'm not a DJ at some dance club somewhere. So anyway.
Yeah, I used to have timothyclee.com was, I had got the domain, and I just always thought, if anybody ever wanted to find me, they could go there. Well, somehow I let it lapse. And so now there's an insurance salesman in Texas named Timothy C. Lee. If you want to buy life insurance or anything, you can go there. And
yeah.
I guess I need to Google my name.
Yeah, you really should.
I'll do that
Really
later.
should.
It's dangerous. Yeah. It's dangerous.
So I'm going to shift now to talking about, because you have been writing books for a long time, and you brought Tim has a number of grandchildren, and you brought him a collection of your children's books. And so how did you get started writing business books? Because you have a consulting that you do, and children's books. How did this... You've had a very busy, full life. So where did the writing emerge from?
Well, the initial writing was actually a request from a consultant to co-write one. He and I have been great friends now for 20-some years, and he'd written a number of books, and he called up one day and said, I'd really like to write a book with you. And I said, okay, why? And he goes, because you're always talking about this religion thing.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, well, first point, I'm sorry you think it's religion, but hopefully over time you'll start thinking of it as faith.
Yeah.
So now when Al and I talk, he's always talking about faith. He doesn't talk about religion.
Cool. That's cool.
So he and I co-wrote Slice of Life.
Yeah.
And then Pat suggested, well, why don't you do a Bible study on it? So I love writing Bible studies. So I did that. And then I made a very silly papa or grandfather public statement in front of my family when I had a single grandchild. And I said, it would be really fun to write a book for each of the grandkids.
Okay.
At the time, there was one high chair sitting there. And I said, it'd be a great legacy. And, I'll leave some life lessons, hopefully, that they can apply later on, too. I didn't know we were going to have 7. And I didn't know that 2 of them were going to come a week apart.
Oh man.
So it's been fun. They can relate to the storyline because in the first book, for example, Evan and I used to always go out and feed the birds and talk about the birds and stuff. And so, but there's lessons that apply to life. And then another connection back at church is the last 2, and hopefully the rest of them
I'm blessed to have Mary Penn do the illustrations.
Oh, yeah.
And she has such a gift. I mean, she can take a rock and make it friendly and happy.
Yeah.
So she did the giraffe and the turtle one.
That's great. And did she write? She did something when Pat passed away.
Yes, she actually wrote a book and gave it to us, dedicated on going to heaven.
Wow.
So beautiful book. Beautiful book.
Well, I have to tell you, so my grandfather wrote books for each of us kids. So my sister and my brother still have it, very treasured item. But you know, when you're young, you think that's just easy to do, right? And as you get older, you think, you know, and he illustrated it.
Never
everything.
thought that.
No,
And so you know, it's like almost like every, you know, I pull it out maybe like once a year and I look at it, you know, and it's one of those things where you go like each year it's like, wow, that took a lot of time and energy. I mean, it wasn't just like something that just came out of thin air, you know, and then you think that they spent, you know, all the time it took to write it, they're thinking about you, you know, so
Well,
I can say that these books, you know, as they get older, they're going to be thinking how even more special they are.
Yeah.
I learned a very special saying when it's much better to say I have written a book than I am writing a book. Because like this time, the editor, I had a wonderful editor, but we had a disagreement as to how many different versions of Pat's story we wrote. Oh. No, I was close to 10 and she had a lower number, so I took my number anyways. But rewriting stuff and making sure it's clear and takes a while, but it's I love it. I really do.
You do enjoy it.
I do very much. It's a hobby.
Yeah.
It's a hobby. I haven't picked up my golf clubs in a couple of years, but I've written some books. So
Wow.
So there's 4 books here. Is there 3 more in the works?
there's 2 ideas floating in my head right now. Those will be for the 3-year-olds that were born a week apart.
All right.
And then we were blessed 6 months ago to have our 7th grandchild, 5th grandson. So I got to spend some time with him before I can decide what the story's going to be.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're finished, so we'll see.
I remember I was thinking about this in your children's books. I think it was this morning as I was getting ready to come into work. And I was remembering the time that in the last year when our kids came over to hang out with you and Pat. And it was really great to see. I see Brian, and we all love Brian. We all know he's got a huge heart, right? We all very much just love Brian. We love his hugs. But I saw when my kids were there, kids swarm around you. Like you were telling them stories or something, and I'm like, come on, we gotta go. But you were like, so have you always had this kind of Pied Piper thing with kids, children? Is that just part of who you are?
Yeah, I'm a big teddy bear. Big teddy bear. So, I mean, children are such a gift.
Yeah.
Their innocence is amazing. And some of the things they do, you're just like, I mean, Tim, you know.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yep.
where did that come from?
Yeah. And their honesty. I mean, they're very, very honest how they feel.
Yeah, sometimes too honest.
Too honest. Yeah, definitely.
Oh my goodness.
So, no, but they're a blessing. And, you know, when I think back on some of the major things in my walk, teens were very, very important. We did a lot of weekend retreats with them.
Huh? Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's neat. So let's hear a little bit about. I know that you kind of came along with Pat. You know, as far as like Pat was here all the time throughout the week.
Absolutely.
And so but there's also a Brian, right? And so, and I've gotten bits and pieces of your story. So tell us where you grew up, and then like where you lived before you ended up at Crossroads. So birth to how you ended up at Crossroads. Just give us an overview.
Okay. Before I forget, I was always introduced as Pastor Pat's husband.
Yeah.
And then I would tell him my name, but that was okay. And I mentioned to you the other day during Pastor Appreciation.
Yeah.
You go to the Hallmark store and you're looking, and it's like For a pastor and his wife. For a pastor and his wife.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of us out there.
Yeah,
whose
there's a
wives
good-
are pastors. So, yeah. So I got to see it from that side. So my story, real simple. In the 60 years, not from the Midwest. Grew up in the Adirondack Mountains. The test to see if anybody knows where those are is when they say upstate New York. Because the people who don't know where it really is will say, well, it's Syracuse and Albany. Well, they're still a couple 100 miles north of there. So 7 miles from the Canadian border. Third generation from Canada. My great-great-grandfather got his apprenticeship as a tailor in Montreal, but there were too many tailors in Montreal, so he went 7 miles across the border to the North America and opened a tailor shop.
Oh my gosh.
So spent the first 20 plus years there. Grew up in a very unique situation in a farmhouse that was 100 years old, but later in life there was another house that was built right onto it. So I would open a door and be in my grandparents' house, my mom's mom and dad, and then I'd close the door and be in my house. So,
Wow, that's kind of neat.
yeah, it was done after my dad came back from the Korean War. So, went to school out east, and then through connections, I did an internship in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and through some connections, got an interview with Caterpillar. And so spent 31 years at Caterpillar and did things, went places, met people that a small town boy of 400 people never thought was possible. So had a really fun time, and mostly because of the people. The people, it was a lot of hard work, but it was the people that made it happen. So I actually met Pat because I needed a good haircut.
I love this story.
Yeah. I was the company spokesman at the time, dealing with all the media and contract negotiations and stuff. And I had two adoptive moms at work because they knew I lived my parents were 1,000 miles away. And they said, you need a new haircut. I said, oh, well, I don't know where to go. And they said, we got somebody for you. So I went to this upscale salon. I was the only person there in bib overalls, a flannel shirt, and a ball cap. And met Pat, did a great job cutting my hair. We weren't even friends. She was just did a nice haircut, and she cut my hair for about a year. And then one night, on a Friday night, we were at a happy hour, and one of my adopted moms showed up with Pat. I said, well, hi, how are you? She said, fine. And that's when I discovered that she was getting a divorce from her first husband, which was my blessing. So I got a 4-year-old and a wonderful wife at the same time. So we moved, Kat moved us to Minnesota for a few years, then to Pennsylvania for a few years, and then back here. And my office for the last 10 or 12 years was in Peoria, but I was on the road a lot. So blessed, 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, 7 grandkids, and we have a family meal every week together. And they have all migrated within 5 minutes of our house.
That's just so awesome.
Yeah, so when I don't see them for a week, all week, it's like, oh my goodness. And then I think about all the grandparents who don't see their grandkids hardly at all. So
Yeah.
Yep.
So I remember you talking about the Adirondacks, and I have this picture in my head. What was it? You used to collect baseball cards, right?
Still do.
And you would. I remember I have this picture in my head of you being a little boy, and you said you would listen to the games on the radio in the mountains. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just this picture in my head of little Brian with his baseball cards laid out, listening to the baseball games on the radio.
And fortunately, my mom and dad, when they were cleaning out part of the farmhouse on my grandparents' side, found
all of my baseball cards, football cards, hockey cards. So there's 11,000 sports cards, and they're all 50 plus years old. So
Wow.
it's like going back in time.
So then,
So would you go to like the card conventions and things like that?
No,
I know.
no, I went directly to the manufacturer.
Because my dad used to collect cards, and we would go on the weekend to like a card collection, and he'd have his whatever year, his set that he needed like 3 cards, and then he'd look for those, those 3, and it was always interesting.
If you met any of the kids that I grew up with, and we were usually either on the ball field, the basketball court, or in the road playing, street hockey or something, they would tell you that I had a little red wagon. I would go to all the neighbors, and I had 3 generations of family within 4 blocks of me in this little town.
oh my gosh.
I'd pick up all the pop bottles, take them to Boyer's, which was the grocery store, cash them in, get the cards. And I'd have a stack of gum like this.
Yeah.
And over the years, I can prove through all the cavities I got in my molars, I chewed them. So, that didn't go to the card collectors.
Yeah. There's something special about the little sticks of gum they put in those
That gum.
card
They're
things. I mean, it was like,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
It's that thin piece of gum.
yeah. So I'll tell a really naive story. So, probably 5 or 6, and every night my mom would say, make sure you take the gum out of your mouth before you go to bed. And I'm like, why? She said, because it'll get in your hair. And I'm thinking, how does my digestive system get it in my hair? So, hopefully I've gotten a little smarter over time.
So now, do you have one sister? Is that right?
I have one sister who's 12 and a half years younger.
Okay.
So the easiest way to describe it is I graduated from high school and she graduated from kindergarten the same year.
Okay. Okay.
She lives 8 miles from where my mom and dad and where we grew up.
So then, did you study engineering in college, or what did you study?
No, I was going to be an attorney,
Okay.
and then I went to see a movie, and I changed my major. So the movie was with Al Pacino called In Justice for All.
Really?
And I walked out of that, and I said, changing my major. So my major was political science and public administration.
Really? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you met Pat, you were already a Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk about your Christian upbringing, and because this is a Christian book, very clearly a Christian book, like we talked about already. So then, how did you become who you are spiritually? Trace that back to your earliest spiritual encounters.
Okay, so little town of 400 people in the Adirondacks, 4 churches. And it was a different time. But a time I wish we could kind of go back to, like on Good Friday from 12 to 3, all the stores were closed. And every Tuesday morning, all the buses would take kids to the 4 churches, and they'd have release time for an hour and a half total from transportation. And it was just, the church was a major part of life. Now, I need to just go back a step. So my parents have told this story a million times, but they're in heaven with Pat, so I'll tell it on them. There was a tradition back in the 50s when they got married that if either one of the individuals was Catholic, then the other would convert and follow that religion. My mom was a diehard Methodist. And she told my dad, if you want to marry me, we're going to have a priest and a minister.
Oh, wow.
And so they got married at St. John Bosco with a priest and a minister. And so for the first, probably the first 10 or 11 years, I would go to Mass with my dad twice a month because he worked shift work. And so the 2 Sundays that he was home, I'd go to Mass with him, and it was in Latin, and I would ask, I don't understand. And he said, it's okay. And then the other 2, I'd go with my mom. And so, if you're following tradition and religion,
hopefully nothing happened to me because I wasn't baptized or anything else. I was just going wherever my parents were going. So, and then they let me make my decision, and so I made my decision based upon the pastor, and was baptized in the Methodist Church before it became United Methodist.
The one that spoke English in the service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But the church was a very important part. The school and church were very important. So, there was always chicken barbecues and pancake suppers, and at least once a week there was something going on. And my mom taught kindergarten, Sunday school for over 50 years.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So it was just a natural. And some things don't change either. I was reflecting on a couple of the questions you asked, and I thought it was interesting, and you can relate to this. The pastors at our church, it was a 3-point charge. So they had to preach 3 times on Sunday morning, and the difference between the church west and the church east and the church in the middle was 7 miles.
Oh my gosh. Right.
And so in the summertime, to relieve some of the work, we'd meet 1 month at one church, then 1 month at another. And the attendance would just drop like crazy. People would only go to their church. So, so we are creatures of habit, for sure.
Sure.
So I would say probably one of the turning points for me was when the first female pastor was assigned to our church, Rev Janet Clark.
This was still in the Adirondacks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
What year would that have been?
was in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s.
That would have been pretty early on in the women clergy.
Yeah, she was amazing. And I'll tell you a quick story about, community and everything. So, Tim, you might appreciate this. So the number one fear of people is speaking in public. And so I'm in 5th grade, and I have to do an oral presentation on the sound of music with the other 20 kids in the class. Same story. And I was a good student, and I knew the content really well. I stood up in front to deliver it, and I just lost it. I literally broke down and cried.
5th grade?
5th grade, yep. And none of my classmates ever, they have as adults, come back and said, it's funny, we never picked on you about that or anything. But long story short, that was like in the middle of the week. Well, Friday, my mom gets a call from Reverend Clark. And she said, "Can I speak to Brian?" And as the story goes, she had gone to the doctors and she had a little tickle in her throat. And so the doctor decided that it was important that she not do the whole service, including the prayers and the responsive readings, et cetera. And would I mind doing that for her? Can't tell Reverend Clark no. So a few years later, I found out that my teacher had called her and told her about breaking down in front of the sound of music.
Wow.
And so this tickle lasted for about 4 or 5 months. So, so
That is so cool. That's such a great story.
And I tell kids that all the time, because who would have thunk? Because I ended up being a corporate spokesman for a Fortune 50 company.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So but Reverend Clark was pretty amazing, and at a young age, she very much changed my perspective. Changed my perspective.
What did you experience from her that felt new in the past? Because I've had that before. Certain pastors I encountered, oh, that's new, right? There's something I'm getting from you or picking up from you that I didn't pick up from other ones. And everyone has their own gift, but what was it that was significant about her?
I think she was a great storyteller. Her sermons were terrific, that a 5th grader could understand and take away. But I think also it was just my age where I got to the point where I was starting to see the difference between religion and faith. And then she reinforced that through her behaviors. So it was pretty amazing.
That's awesome.
Pretty amazing. So.
Did you stay plugged in through high school?
Yeah, that's another part of the story, yeah. So she got transferred several years later, and I was debating my senior year where I was going to go to college and what I was going to study, and I had considered going into the ministry, the formal ministry. And for literally 3 days, I just kind of struggled, stayed up in my room, and finally my mom said, "Why don't you call Reverend Clark?" Now, she was about 100 miles away. We hadn't talked for several years. And so my mom got the phone number. I called her, and she picked up the phone, and she said, "Well, hi, Brian. How are you? I was just about to call you. You have a really important question to answer, don't you?" That would be a huge God wink. So we had a great conversation and decided I think something around the exact words were, there's a lot of places where people who wear collars can't get in and preach, but you can if you want to go into the business world. So if you go into the business world, that's fine too.
Wow.
And so that's what I did.
So you felt really a call from God to carry the gospel to the business world.
I've never thought about it that before, but I think without a doubt, people didn't guess what I believed.
That's so cool.
So Reverend Clark was very important, and I'm looking forward to seeing her again because unfortunately she was in a car wreck, and it was a fatal one. The car burned, so looking forward to seeing her in heaven and thanking her in person.
So then, where did you go to college in the East?
I went to college in Oneonta, New York, all the Indian names down there, but it's probably 20 minutes from the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
Okay. Okay.
So which was another first because I was the first ever to get to go to college. My parents sacrificed like crazy, but I got to go to college. I didn't go to the state schools that were 20 or 30 minutes away for fear my mom would pop in. So 5 hours was just the right amount of time. And then, I was the first to move out of the area.
So how was your faith lived out in college? Was it a lot of people?
I would say that it probably went and got parked for a little while.
It happens.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So
then did Pat kind of bring you, how old were you when you met Pat?
Probably 27, 28.
So did she kind of bring you back to the church, or did you kind of come back, after college?
No, I was actually going to Forest Hill United Methodist Church.
Okay.
And several people, came up immediately and kind of embraced me and adopted me. And so, I was going there.
In Peoria?
In Peoria.
Oh, that's where my grandparents went.
Yeah, the little stained glass windows and stuff. That's where we were married.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Where we were married. So, but then again, I think, Pat was a major, major, major influencer in my life. And the book talks a little bit about that. But we got heavily involved in a number of weekend retreats. So we did GAREAU, we did Walk to Emmaus, and then we did a whole bunch of Wesley weekends. Okay. And Wesley weekends were very much like GAREAU and Walk to Emmaus, except they were done in the local church to support the local pastor who wanted to jumpstart an initiative. And there were men's weekends, women's weekends, and then the teens were combined. I probably did 15 or 20 of those.
Where was that at?
Where was what at?
Where did you do those?
We did them in the local church that was sponsoring the event.
Like in Peoria?
Peoria, Princeville, Mossville, all over.
So that must have been, what years would that have been? 90s?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because that's never been a part of my experience. I've heard about them, but that's really cool.
Yeah.
Those must have kind of phased out. Because when I came back in 2002, I wasn't hearing about those, but people were still going on Walk to Emmaus.
Yeah, it was great because the local pastor
basically committed to follow through
Yeah.
with a congregation. And while people were from a lot of different churches and denominations, the core group was from that local church that participated. So it was good. And so I love the teen weekends. There's something about, a candlelight service where there's a picture of Christ on the altar and you're playing James Taylor, You Got a Friend.
That's cool.
There's not a dry eye in the circle, believe me. But we had a lot of fun for a number of years. So I think those were very, very important.
So then, how long were you married? Because then you said, I remember Pat had like a latent call that you kind of encouraged her to step back into.
Right. We were married 35 years. Pat would describe her life as in 4 stages. So stage 4 was being a grandma or a nana. Mm-hmm. Stage 3 was the formal ministry. But as you know, when she formally retired, the next day she was just volunteering doing the same stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I always would describe, I saw I saw leaders as 2 things, either ministers or pastors. Very seldom was an individual both. And so, the minister, very educated, loves to run the organization, the administrative, the finances, loves all that stuff. And then the pastor's kind of the extra special caregiver. Pat was exceptional at caregiving. Mm. And I think, one of the things she always talked about, which was hard for her at the end of her life here on earth, was simply the fact that she had always been on the caregiving side, and receiving was hard for her. Mm. But she would always describe going into a situation, I'm sure you've been there too, where you'd walk in and very quickly you could tell whether the individuals had faith or not, because if they had faith, they were looking at what was best for the individual who was ill and about to pass, and the people who were struggling were always, well, I'm not ready. And Pat was ready. She just, her comment that I put in the book was, her goal was to watch the grandkids get married. She said she'd just have to do it from a different point of view. So,
yeah.
Well, the great thing about Pat, when we'd have staff meetings, it was always, our typical staff meeting is you go around the room and you share what's going on with your ministry. And Pat would always just give encouragement to everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, she was on the care team, and she'd talk a little bit about that, but then it would be like, Kristen, I saw something with the youth, it was just so great, and Tim, the music in the weekend, and Jason, the sermon, and it was like she would just lift everybody up so that when we didn't have a staff meeting for 2 weeks, that we had that encouragement to kind of get us through to the next meeting. And that was always great. And Pat's personality is so much like my sister. Like, there was just, so every time I'd have a conversation with her, I just think of my sister, because my sister was just like that. I mean, she's always like encouraging, but also very, I don't want to say authoritative, but she always spoke very confident, and that's what always reminded me of my sister. So that's...
She's smiling right now hearing that. So.
I'm thinking of 3 words for both of you as a couple: warmth, great warmth, generous, very generous spirit, and hospitality. She, even in her room, even on her deathbed, right, just so hospitable, just so good at making people feel comfortable and welcoming people around her. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a privilege to sit and hear the conversations. I mean, you and she had several amazing conversations.
It was so great.
So I won't give that away. They'll have to buy the book. How's that?
It was so great.
Yeah,
and a great sense of humor. I mean,
Great, hilarious. She
if
would
Pat
have
was in
me
the room,
laughing.
you're always laughing. I mean, it was like,
Oh, yeah.
that-
Yeah.
She put up with me, so she had to.
Man. Yeah. Yeah. So I know we're getting close to the time we like to end by. So any spiritual life lessons you want to share? That was the last thing. Yeah.
Okay, well, I did write a couple of down, and there's not 3 like sermons. There's a couple
points.
more than 3. So I think the first one was just to make sure people learn and understand there's a huge difference between religion and faith. Religion is man-made, and oh my goodness, the conversations at my house, at least, when Pat would go to a new church and quickly find out, well, that's not the way that we do communion. We have to break the bread, or we have to kneel, or we can't do intinction, etc. And sometimes we forget about what it's all about, which is the faith side. So there's a huge difference, and I think, unfortunately, I think religion is right now creating division, and I think faith would perhaps help with inclusion. So that would be one. Another one that I have lived out is I'm glad that Peter's in Scripture, because he was written specifically to remind me of how I am up and down. But I'm reminded a lot of GAREAU. Have you heard that acronym, GAREAU? It's GIGO. I'm old enough now to remember when there weren't computers, there were just dumb terminals. But when the first computers came in, there was a standard line that said, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out.
Oh, sure.
And I think that from a perspective and a faith standpoint, if you do put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So if you don't worship, if you don't read Scripture, if you don't do devotions, if you don't listen to Christian music, if you don't have Christian friends, then your perspective is going to get really tainted very quickly, and you're going to miss out. So there are times in my life, probably college would be one, where there's a little more garbage in than there should have been. So the third one is real simple, but I think for me, it's a perspective on relationship. I think when I was young, before Reverend Clark, et cetera, I saw a lot of activity that was focused on the church. But it wasn't until I started to realize the importance of the relationship with Jesus that I really got it. And again, maybe I'm showing my age, but I just find it amazing today with some of the technology. People say, well, I got 655 friends. I'm like, really? Because that's not the definition of a friend from my perspective.
Yeah.
Somebody who would drop anything and everything to help you out.
Yeah.
That's a really small amount. Think about the people in high school or college who went to, we'll always be friends, we'll always stay connected. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But then there's that really super special relationship with Jesus. And if I don't put any time into that relationship, my perspective gets really tainted, really tainted. Take it for granted. I mean, think about the relationships in life that you take for granted. Usually doesn't turn out very well.
Yeah.
So, 2 more. One is when we were at Asbury United Methodist Church in Allentown, Pennsylvania for a number of years, we did this study, and it really, really hit me one day that there is a constant battle going on for our soul. But in the United Methodist Church, we don't talk about that as much as other churches do. But I was coaching football at the time, and the way the pastor that day explained it, he said, well, think about 2 teams playing football, and you're on one team, and the devil's on the other team, and you think you're going to go out and beat them? Ain't going to happen. Ain't going to happen. The field is tilted. But if you get an even playing field and you put Christ there, you're going to win every time. But the fact that there's a battle for me,
Yeah.
one, I'm pretty important, but two, it's ongoing. It never stops.
Yeah.
It never stops. And then the last one, I'll ask Mr. Tim this, but how many keys are there, or excuse me, how many strings are there on a
Guitar?
on a piano? No.
88.
88 strings or keys?
Or 88 keys.
88 keys.
So was it 3 strings per key?
About.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm not a mathematician, so I can't do
there's
88
between
times 3.
220 and 240 strings in a piano.
Okay.
And in my faith journey, what I found is that there were many times where I was giving God all but maybe 1 or 2 of those strings. Okay, God, I trust you. You can take care of this. And then the devil just played that note over and over and over again in my head and my heart, and it was like, ay, ay, ay. So, you gotta cut all the strings.
Yeah.
Gotta cut all the strings.
Boy, that's good. That's a lot of what our prayer team's been training about and reading about and learning about.
It's awesome.
By the way, if anybody is listening and they do feel like they are having demonic oppression, Leslie would love to.
Oh, love to set up a prayer appointment with them.
Well, we do have training now to do that, right?
Absolutely.
We've been digging in and getting.
Yeah.
We've been learning a lot. So praise God.
You got to get out there and do it.
Yeah, yeah. So anything else, Tim?
Not really. I mean,
Thanks for letting me share.
I know, Brian, you have a love of music and
very
horns,
much.
especially when we talk about horns. I was talking about
Horns.
stuff that we've heard recently, that comes out that, that's got horns on it. So,
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan of the Chicago's, the Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and just, bands that just, I don't know, there's something about a horn section that's like an integral part of the band as opposed to just sort of like they maybe put it in at the last minute,
So one of my favorite weekends in college is we drove over to Saratoga, and they had a blowout weekend. So Friday night was the Beach Boys. Saturday was ELO with the spaceship. And then Sunday was Chicago. So
Oh, wow.
it was a great weekend. Great
Oh,
weekend.
man.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Tim's Dream Week.
So, again, if anybody wants to grab this book or any of Brian's other books, can we put a link in the show notes?
Yeah, we'll put a link in there.
Do we have show notes?
Yeah.
We do?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, cool.
well, there's comments.
They're very short, but yeah.
Yeah. And then how do people stay in tune? I know more people are listening to our podcast. And
Well, so we've recently linked all the podcasts because I didn't know we could do this to the public Facebook Crossroads page has a podcast thing where you link your podcast in. Because I've noticed as I go through Facebook, all of a sudden I hear your sermons start playing,
Yeah.
or
I've noticed that
or the
lately
hot seats
too.
start playing,
Yeah.
and I'm going, who did that? That's a great idea. And then I realized that it pulls from the feed and it sticks it in there. So on the public Facebook page, you can listen to it. On YouTube, you can watch the video. And then anywhere that you listen to the audio podcast, whether that's iTunes or any other podcast player, you just basically put Crossroads UMC or Crossroads Washington in, and it should come up with all the sermons, all these hot seats, and any other sort of audio content that comes out.
I like Spotify.
Yeah, I do too.
Is that what you use?
Yeah.
Spotify.
So can I add one last
Sure.
comment? So sometimes it's easy to take things for granted. It's 35 miles from round trip from my house,
Yeah.
and right a mile, I go past multiple churches, but a mile from my house is the biggest Christian church in the area.
Yeah.
I come here because it's family. But I think the other part that I would share is, having been married to a pastor, I would just encourage everybody to make sure that we don't put the pastors too high up on a pedestal, because they're human beings. They hurt.
Yeah.
They have feelings. They don't have all the answers. And I think sometimes we forget that because we're kind of focused on ourselves.
Yeah.
But you and Megan do a fantastic job. You and Sarah did a fantastic job together. but you're not perfect, and you hurt once in a while. And sometimes you just need a good hug.
Yeah.
And you also just need somebody to say, "It's okay.
Yeah.
You made a mistake. No problem. Let's move on."
Totally.
So that's my last comment.
That's good. That's good. And as a pastor's spouse, you got to see the inside of what it's like, right?
Yeah, I can't get a Hallmark card, but that's my comment.
Yeah, totally. Well,
You should make your own Hallmark card.
Yeah,
That's good.
You should
pastor's
start
husband
doing cards.
That could be a good podcast. Is Brian and Janice having a conversation?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be good. That would be good.
That would be really
That's a
good.
that's a perspective not very many people are.
I want to be here for that one too.
Yeah, but Janice would have a lot more to share.
Yeah. So Leslie, why don't you close us in prayer?
Okay. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for today and for conversation and getting to know Brian more and his journey and his love and passion for you and his family and for his wife. And we're just so grateful that Brian keeps coming here and just shining his light to all the people at Crossroads. And we're just so thankful for him and his family. And we just love you and we thank you. Amen.
Amen.